My son's business was failing, his children's home at risk. So, I signed the papers my daughter-in-law put in front of me, trusting it was just collateral. 3 weeks later, she told me I'd signed away my house, and my son added they couldn't afford my lifestyle. I just packed my bags. But sometimes, the quiet ones are just planning. Like, share, and tell me where you're listening from. I'm excited to share my story with you. The stale air of the courtroom pressed down on Eleanor, a weight far heavier than any physical burden. At 63, her life felt less like a journey and more like a fragile structure collapsing around her, brick by painful brick. It had all started with a signature, a simple act of love and trust, now twisted into the instrument of her undoing. Her gaze, unfocused, skimmed over the stack of legal documents before her, their crisp white pages blurring into an illegible testament to her foolishness. "Mrs. Henderson, do you understand what you've signed?" The lawyer's voice, distant and devoid of warmth, sliced through the haze of her despair. Eleanor blinked, the words echoing without truly registering. How could she understand? The ink on those papers had been a promise, a lifeline for her family. Now, it was a noose. Across the room, at a table that felt a million miles away, sat Serafina, her daughter-in-law. Beside her, Eleanor's own son, Nathaniel. Serafina's lips were curved into a faint, satisfied smile, a predatory gleam in her eyes that sent a chill down Eleanor's spine. Nathaniel, on the other hand, avoided her gaze, his face a mask of carefully constructed indifference. This was the tableau of her ruin. The courtroom faded, replaced by the memory of a tearful encounter 3 months prior. Serafina had arrived at Eleanor's door, eyes swollen and red, a picture of distress. "Eleanor," she had choked out, her voice trembling. "We're in so much trouble. Nathaniel's business. It's failing. Badly." Eleanor's heart had instantly gone out to them. Nathaniel, her only son, a man she had raised with boundless love and unwavering support. The thought of his struggles was a physical ache. Serafina had spun a tale of mounting debts, of creditors circling like vultures, and the ultimate horror, the threat of foreclosure on their beautiful family home. "Our house," Serafina had sobbed. "Where Olivia and Leo live, their only stable place. They'll lose everything." The image of her grandchildren, Olivia and Leo, displaced and heartbroken, had been unbearable. Serafina had clung to Eleanor's arm, her desperation palpable, begging for help. Then came the proposal. Serafina, composing herself slightly, had explained their supposed solution. "We just need some temporary help, Eleanor. If we could use your house as collateral for a new business loan, just until Nathaniel's business stabilizes. It's just paperwork, really. A temporary consolidation of assets." She had painted a picture of a quick, seamless process, a mere formality that would save them. "It's a way for the bank to see we have assets, that we're good for the loan." Her words were honeyed, persuasive, designed to soothe any lingering doubts. Nathaniel had followed up with his own plea, his voice thick with what Eleanor had believed was genuine desperation. "Mom, please, you're our only hope. Without this, we lose everything. The kids, they deserve better." His eyes, usually so bright, had been shadowed with what seemed like despair. How could she refuse her own son? How could she stand by and watch her grandchildren lose their home, her house, her sanctuary? The solid, comforting walls had stood for 37 years, a testament to her life with Arthur, her late husband. Every creak of the floorboards held a memory. Every sunbeam filtering through the living room window brought a whisper of laughter from a time long past. It was more than just bricks and mortar. It was the repository of her past, the anchor of her present. But for her family, for Nathaniel, for Olivia and Leo, she would do anything. Out of love, out of trust, she had signed the papers. A simple, hopeful signature, ink binding her to what she believed was an act of selfless love. 3 weeks later, the facade crumbled. Serafina had arrived again, but this time, there were no tears, no desperate pleas. Her demeanor was cold, businesslike, her eyes hard and unyielding. "Eleanor," she had stated, her voice flat. We need to talk. The words that followed had punched the air from Eleanor's lungs. The paperwork you signed wasn't just for collateral. You actually transferred ownership of the house to us. We're selling it. The world tilted. Collateral? A temporary measure? It had been a lie. A cruel, calculated deception. Eleanor felt the strength drain from her legs. She sank onto her worn couch, the familiar fabric offering no comfort. Serafina, she whispered, her voice barely audible. This is my home. Where am I supposed to live? Serafina merely shrugged, a gesture of profound indifference that cut Eleanor deeper than any sharp word. That's really your concern, Eleanor, she had said, her tone dismissive. Nathaniel's response, when he eventually spoke, was even worse. He had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable, but his words were laced with a dismissive cruelty that stung. Mom, I'm sorry, but Serafina handled the legal stuff. You should have read what you signed. Honestly, we can't afford to keep supporting your lifestyle anyway. Supporting her lifestyle? Eleanor, a frugal woman who lived off a modest pension and Social Security, had always been self-sufficient. The words were a venomous dagger, twisted by the hand of her own son. The next day, a perky realtor with a blindingly white smile had arrived, clipboard in hand, already discussing market value and curb appeal. She talked cheerfully about how quickly the house would sell, reducing 37 years of Eleanor's life, of her memories, of Arthur's presence, to a mere 2-week transaction. Eleanor watched, numb, as strangers walked through her home, sizing it up, seeing only square footage and potential profit. Driven from her sanctuary, Eleanor found herself in a tiny, cramped studio apartment, barely enough room to turn around, costing a shocking $800 a month. After rent, utilities, and basic necessities, she was left with a paltry $200 a month from her pension. Her meager savings, intended for emergencies, would last less than a year at this rate. Despair, a heavy blanket, threatened to suffocate her. One evening, staring blankly at the screen of her old laptop, an advertisement flickered into view. UberX. Be your own boss. Flexible hours. Drive whenever you want. A tiny spark, an ember of something long forgotten, ignited within her. It was a lifeline, a desperate, uncertain one, but a chance. Eleanor, for the first time in weeks, felt a faint stirring of resolve. She would drive. She would survive. The transition to being an UberX driver was, to put it mildly, a disaster. Eleanor, who had always prided herself on her meticulous nature, found herself floundering. The first week was a blur of wrong turns, exasperated sighs from passengers, and the constant, nagging anxiety of missing a pickup. The navigation app, with its assertive female voice, seemed to mock her confusion. She'd get lost in familiar neighborhoods, struggling to decipher the intricate dance of one-way streets and sudden detours. One particularly impatient young man had even slammed the door and stormed off, leaving her with a stinging 1-star review because she was driving too slowly. The comment had felt like a fresh wound on an already battered soul. Each day ended with a crushing sense of inadequacy, her hands aching from gripping the steering wheel, her spirit bruised. But Eleanor was not one to give up easily. By the second week, a grudging rhythm began to emerge. She started to anticipate the app's directions, learned the shortcuts and the peak traffic times. She mastered the polite small talk, the art of blending into the background, becoming a silent chauffeur ferrying strangers through their busy lives. She swallowed her pride, a bitter pill, with every swipe of the app, every passenger request. This wasn't the life she had envisioned, certainly not the dignified twilight years she had always imagined. But it was survival. It was enough. The hardest part, though, wasn't the challenging streets or the demanding passengers. It was the isolation. Nathaniel, her son, had stopped calling. His apologies had dwindled, then ceased altogether. Serafina had outright blocked her number, her silence a stark exclamation mark on their betrayal. Eleanor found herself cut off, a pariah in her own family. Shame, a cruel companion, kept her from reaching out to old friends. How could she explain? How could she admit the extent of her humiliation, the depth of her children's deceit? She couldn't bear the pity, the questions, the unspoken judgment. Some nights, after long shifts of ferrying strangers, Eleanor would pull her car into a quiet, dimly lit parking lot. The solitude of the vehicle, usually a source of unease, became a sanctuary. There, in the dim glow of the dashboard lights, she would cry. Hot, silent tears would stream down her face. Tears for the life she had lost, for the trust that had been shattered, for the crushing loneliness that settled deep in her bones. She missed Arthur, her kind, steady husband, more than words could say. He had always known how to comfort her, how to make her laugh. "Life has a way of surprising you, Eleanor," he used to say, his eyes twinkling. "Just when you think you've got it all figured out, it throws a curveball. But sometimes, those curveballs lead to something beautiful." She wondered what beautiful thing could possibly emerge from this wreckage. She felt her story was finished, a closed book, its final pages stained with sorrow. Little did she know, as Arthur had always hinted, that the most important chapters begin when you think the book is closing. Then, on a crisp October Wednesday, a new chapter began to unfold. The app buzzed, signaling a pickup at the opulent Grand View Hotel, a place Eleanor usually only drove past. The name that appeared on her screen was Julian Hawthorne. When he emerged from the hotel lobby, he was instantly noticeable. Tall, with a distinguished mane of silver hair that softened the edges of a sharp, intelligent face. His suit, impeccably tailored, spoke of understated luxury. But it was his eyes that captured Eleanor's attention, a striking shade of blue-gray, shadowed by an unmistakable air of deep, profound sadness. He carried himself with a quiet dignity, but there was a vulnerability beneath the polished exterior that Eleanor, familiar with her own grief, immediately recognized. He approached the car, opening the back door with an almost old-fashioned courtesy. "Mrs. Henderson," he said, his voice cultured and melodic, carrying a hint of melancholy. "I'm Julian Hawthorne." Eleanor felt a flicker of surprise at his formality. "Please," she replied, a small, genuine smile touching her lips for the first time in what felt like ages. "Call me Eleanor." He nodded, a barely perceptible dip of his head, and settled into the back seat. The destination was the airport, a 45-minute drive that unfolded mostly in silence. Eleanor focused on the road, acutely aware of his presence in the rearview mirror. She caught his gaze several times, his blue-gray eyes meeting hers for a fleeting moment before he would turn to stare out the window, lost in thought. There was no judgment in his gaze, only a quiet contemplation that made Eleanor feel, for the first time in months, not entirely invisible. At the terminal, as she pulled up to the departure's curb, he reached into his wallet. The fare was $28. He handed her a crisp $50 bill. "Keep it," he said simply, his voice soft. "And tell me, Mrs. Henderson, same time next week?" Eleanor was taken aback. A regular passenger? A generous tip? It was an unexpected kindness. "Yes," she managed, a little surprised by her own eagerness. "Yes, I can do that." As he stepped out of the car, he turned, and his blue-gray eyes, so full of unspoken sorrow, locked with hers once more. "Thank you, Eleanor," he said, a genuine warmth in his tone. "You drive very carefully. It's comforting." Eleanor watched him go, a tall, solitary figure disappearing into the bustling terminal. She sat there for a long moment, the $50 bill clutched in her hand, a strange mix of confusion and a nascent curiosity swirling within her. His sadness resonated with her own, a quiet echo in the empty space of her life. What was his story? And why did her careful driving bring him comfort? The following Wednesday, precisely at 9:15 a.m., Julian Hawthorne was waiting. He emerged from the Grand View Hotel looking exactly as he had the week before. Impeccably dressed, silver-haired, and still, unmistakably, melancholic. This time, however, he carried a small, intricately carved wooden box, which he held with an almost reverent care. He settled into the back seat, the wooden box resting gently on his lap, a silent companion to his quiet grief. This routine became a weekly ritual. Each Wednesday, the same time, the same quiet drive to the airport. Julian would sit, lost in his thoughts, occasionally glancing at Eleanor in the rearview mirror, but rarely speaking beyond the initial greeting. The tips were always generous. Eleanor, in turn, found a strange, unexpected comfort in his presence. His quiet sadness, so palpable, yet so contained, mirrored her own. In the silent space of her car, amidst the bustling world outside, they were two solitary souls, each carrying their own invisible burdens, finding a peculiar solace in their shared, unspoken melancholy. Weeks turned into a quiet routine, the predictable rhythm of Wednesday mornings, a steadying pulse in Eleanor's tumultuous life. She found herself looking forward to these trips, not just for the much-needed income they provided, but for something far less tangible. Julian Hawthorne's presence, though largely silent, was strangely soothing. He never pried, never asked personal questions about her life, nor did he offer any judgment. He simply existed in the back seat, a silent, respectful, melancholic presence that, in a peculiar way, mirrored her own internal landscape. In the quiet solitude of her car, their shared, unspoken sorrow formed a fragile, comfortable bridge between them. Eleanor, ever observant, began to notice the small, precise details that defined Julian's weekly ritual. His timing was impeccable. He was always waiting, exactly at 9:15 a.m., at the Grand View Hotel. He always chose the same seat, directly behind the passenger seat, his eyes fixed on the world outside, or sometimes, on her reflection in the rearview mirror. What struck her most was his consistent lack of luggage. No suitcase, no carry-on, nothing to suggest a journey beyond the airport itself. It was as if his destination was not a distant city, but the act of going to the airport, a pilgrimage without an ultimate arrival. One particularly dreary Wednesday, the sky weeping a steady cold rain, Eleanor glanced back to check her mirror. Julian, usually composed, had his eyes closed. His long, elegant fingers were tracing the intricate carvings on the small wooden box he always carried. His lips moved almost imperceptibly, as if he were whispering to someone unseen, a silent conversation with a ghost only he could perceive. The sight tugged at Eleanor's heart, a raw, exposed nerve of grief she recognized all too well. "Are you all right, Mr. Hawthorne?" Eleanor asked gently, her voice softer than she intended, breaking the comfortable silence. Julian's eyes snapped open, a flicker of surprise, perhaps even vulnerability, in their blue-gray depths. He straightened, his composure returning almost instantly. "Yes, I'm fine. Thank you for asking, Eleanor." His voice was polite, but there was a fragility beneath it, a hint of something barely contained. Eleanor, surprising herself with her own temerity, pressed on. "It's just, you seem troubled. If you ever want to talk about whatever is bothering you, I'm a good listener." The words hung in the air, a risky offering of intimacy in their carefully constructed professional relationship. He was silent for a long moment, the only sound the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers against the falling rain. Eleanor braced herself for a polite deflection, a gentle rebuke. Instead, as they pulled up to the airport terminal, he turned to face her fully. "You have kind eyes, Eleanor," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, yet infused with an unexpected intensity. "Has anyone ever told you that?" Eleanor felt a flush rise to her cheeks. It had been so long since anyone had offered such a personal observation, such a genuine compliment. "Thank you," she managed, her voice a little shaky. He lingered for a moment, his gaze fixed on hers, a world of unspoken emotion swirling in his eyes. Then, almost to himself, he whispered, "They remind me of someone I knew a long time ago, someone I should have fought harder to keep." He stepped out of the car, the rain plastering his silver hair to his forehead, and looked back once more, his silhouette framed by the harsh fluorescent lights of the terminal. Then, he was gone, leaving Eleanor with a lingering sense of profound sadness, a deep pain that resonated with her own. That night, back in her tiny studio apartment, Eleanor couldn't shake Julian Hawthorne from her thoughts. His quiet grief, the way he clutched the wooden box, his words about losing someone he should have fought for. It all spoke of a profound loss, a regret that mirrored her own aching sorrow for Arthur, and the bitter sting of betrayal by Nathaniel and Seraphina. She found herself obsessively replaying their brief conversation, dissecting every word, every nuance. Driven by a nascent curiosity and a strange sense of kinship, she subtly searched the news, convinced that a man of his obvious stature and wealth would have left some public record, some trace of his existence beyond the Grandview Hotel. She typed Julian Hawthorne into her search engine, sifting through pages of articles, obituaries, and social registries. But there was nothing. No prominent business dealings, no philanthropic ventures, no mention in society pages. It was as if Julian Hawthorne, the impeccably dressed, silver-haired gentleman, simply didn't exist in the public sphere. The mystery deepened, drawing her further into his silent world. Their weekly rendezvous continued. Then, during their 7th week, Julian arrived with a subtle shift in his routine. He emerged from the Grandview Hotel without the familiar wooden box. Instead, clutched carefully in his hand, was an old, faded photograph. His expression, while still melancholic, held a new, more purposeful intensity. He settled into the back seat, the photograph held loosely in his lap. "Eleanor," he began, his voice clearer, more direct than usual. "May I ask you something personal?" Eleanor's heart gave a little flutter. This was new territory. She nodded, her gaze meeting his in the rearview mirror. "Of course." "Mr. Hawthorne." He took a deep breath, his blue-gray eyes searching hers, as if seeking permission, or perhaps understanding. Then, he posed a question that sliced through the professional veneer of their relationship. A question that resonated with the deepest chambers of Eleanor's own heart. "Have you ever lost someone you loved because you were too proud or too scared to fight for them?" The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken histories, with regrets both shared and deeply personal. Eleanor thought of Arthur, of the unspoken words, the suddenness of his departure. She thought of Nathaniel, of the moments she should have seen the signs, the times she should have demanded accountability, and the ultimate, crushing loss of her trust. She thought of Seraphina, of the battle she had not even known she was fighting until it was already over. A lifetime of choices, of moments of courage and moments of fear, flashed through her mind. After a long pause, her voice imbued with the raw truth of her experiences, Eleanor simply replied, "Yes, I have." Julian Hawthorne nodded slowly, a profound weariness etched onto his silver-haired face. "So have I," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying the weight of decades of regret. "And I've spent 45 years wondering what my life might have been like if I'd been braver." The number, 45 years, echoed in Eleanor's mind, a startling measure of time. It deepened the mystery surrounding this man, yet at the same time, it humanized him, explaining the depth of his melancholy, his willingness to share such a raw, personal truth with a stranger. It was a testament to a loss so profound it still shaped his very being. The next Wednesday rolled around, bringing with it a chill that promised the onset of winter. It was the week before Thanksgiving, a time usually filled with the warmth of family. But for Eleanor, it was just another day of quiet solitude. The sky above was a uniform, heavy gray, hinting at the first snow of the season, and the air was unusually still, hushed with an almost reverent quiet. Eleanor arrived at the Grandview Hotel a few minutes early, as was her habit, but Julian was already there. He stood just outside the grand revolving doors, a solitary figure against the imposing backdrop of the hotel. His usual impeccable posture, the proud bearing she had grown accustomed to, seemed subtly diminished. His shoulders were slightly slumped, and as she pulled up to the curb, she noticed a faint tremor in his hands as he reached for the car door. A ripple of concern went through her. "Good morning, Eleanor," he said, his voice softer than usual, almost fragile, lacking its customary cultured resonance. He settled into the back seat, carefully placing the old photograph on the seat beside him, not on his lap as he sometimes did. "Good morning, Mr. Hawthorne. Are you feeling all right?" Eleanor asked, her concern evident in her tone. He paused. A long, drawn-out moment of silence hanging in the air. "I've been better," he finally confessed, his gaze fixed on some unseen point beyond the windshield. "But I'm glad it's today. Glad that if this is my last Wednesday, it's with you." A sudden, unexpected chill snaked its way down Eleanor's spine, a premonition of something unsettling. "What do you mean your last Wednesday?" "Mr. Hawthorne?" she asked, her voice laced with an anxiety she hadn't realized she felt for this quiet, silver-haired stranger. Julian turned his head then, leaning slightly forward. His blue-gray eyes, though still shadowed with sorrow, held a surprising new brightness, an almost desperate intensity. "Eleanor," he began, his voice gaining a quiet strength. "May I tell you about someone I loved once?" Eleanor swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. She sensed the immense gravity of his impending confession, the weight of a story held captive for decades, now on the verge of being released. She nodded slowly, an unspoken invitation for him to continue, bracing herself for whatever profound tale of lost love he was about to unravel. "Her name was Eleanor Rose," he began, his voice a gentle murmur, rich with memory. The words hit Eleanor like a physical blow. Her heart, already beating a frantic rhythm, seemed to nearly stop in her chest. Eleanor Rose. Rose. It was her middle name, the maiden name of her mother, the name her own father had affectionately called her. Coincidence? It was too striking, too precise to be mere chance. A tremor started deep within her, a ripple of unease and a budding, terrifying hope, he continued, oblivious to the storm he had just unleashed within her. "She was 17 when I met her, and I was 18. It was the summer of 1978. 1978. That was exactly her age, that exact year. The coincidences were piling up, no longer possible to ignore, yet too unbelievable to accept. He painted a vivid picture, his words a brushstroke of memory. She worked at her father's diner, in Richmond, a small, bustling place, smelling of coffee and frying bacon. She had the most incredible smile, Eleanor, one that could light up the whole room, dark hair, usually pulled back in a neat ponytail, and eyes. Her eyes were brown, but if you looked closely, you could see flecks of gold in them, especially when she laughed. Eleanor's hands, still gripping the steering wheel, began to tremble uncontrollably. Her vision blurred, not from tears, but from the sudden, overwhelming sensation of a past, long buried, suddenly surging into the present. The description, every detail, was uncannily accurate. Her own dark hair, her brown eyes that Arthur always said held specks of sun, her father's diner in Richmond. The name? The age? The year? It couldn't be. It simply could not be. As if to seal the impossible truth, he continued, his voice softer now, tinged with a familiar sorrow. And she had this small scar. Just here. He paused, his left hand raising slightly, his thumb and forefinger lightly touching the palm of his hand, on her left hand. From when she was 12, she'd broken a glass at the diner, and a shard had cut her deep. "I always used to tease her," said it was her battle scar. Eleanor's breath hitched in her throat. Without thinking, as if compelled by an unseen force, her left hand lifted, her fingers tracing the faint, faded line across her own palm. An identical scar. A scar she had carried since she was 12, a constant, minor imperfection she had never given a second thought to. A scar from a broken glass at her father's diner. The universe, it seemed, had suddenly become very small and infinitely complicated. This is truly a story that makes you wonder about fate and second chances. If you're captivated by how Eleanor's life is unfolding, please remember to like this video, share it with someone who appreciates a powerful story, and subscribe so you don't miss the next part of her incredible journey. Let's see how her past unravels further. "We fell in love that summer," Julian continued, his voice thick with an emotion that transcended the decades. Raw and potent, he spoke of a love so profound, so all-consuming, that it resonated deep within Eleanor's own heart. It was real love. "Eleanor," he insisted, his voice cracking slightly, the kind that changes you forever, that imprints itself on your soul. He described long, sun-drenched days, stolen moments behind the diner, and whispered promises under starlit skies. He recounted their youthful dreams, laid out with the boundless optimism of 17 and 18-year-olds. Eleanor, the girl he remembered, wanted to be a teacher, to shape young minds and nurture knowledge. He, David, spoke with fierce ambition of taking over his father's company, of building an empire, not just for wealth, but for the respect it would command, the power it would give him to control his own destiny. Their futures, they believed, were inextricably linked. Eleanor, her body shaking with a tremor that began deep in her bones, could no longer continue driving. The road blurred before her, the familiar streetlights transforming into streaks of white. With trembling hands, she pulled the car over into the first available spot, a deserted corner of a gas station parking lot. The car idled, its gentle rumble, a stark contrast to the earthquake rattling inside her. She turned off the engine, plunging them into a sudden, unnerving silence. "Sir," she whispered, her voice barely audible, catching in her throat. What was her last name? Julian, still lost in the reverie of memory, smiled sadly. Rose. Eleanor Rose. The most beautiful name I'd ever heard. Eleanor's head snapped up. She turned fully to face him. The small, old photograph still clutched in his hand, now almost a secondary detail. Her gaze locked with his blue-gray eyes she had once known so intimately. For a long, breathtaking moment, time seemed to dissolve. The Uber, the gas station, the 45 years of separation, all vanished. There was only the recognition, slow at first, then blossoming into an undeniable, heart-wrenching certainty on both their faces. A name, a face, a past long buried, now bursting forth with an intensity that stole her breath. David, she breathed. The name a fragile whisper from her youth. A name she hadn't spoken in decades. A name she had often thought she'd forgotten how to say. Julian's eyes, already brimming with unspoken sorrow, closed slowly, and fresh tears streamed down his weathered cheeks, carving paths through the lines of age. "Hello, Eleanor Rose," he whispered back, his voice thick with the weight of memory and unbearable regret. It was him, David Morrison, the boy who had worked construction that magical summer, with his strong hands and his easy laugh, the boy who had promised to return for her, to build a life with her, and who had then vanished without a trace, leaving a gaping wound in her 17-year-old heart, a wound that had never truly healed. 45 years. A lifetime. The shock gave way to a surge of questions, of confusion, of the raw, unadulterated pain of a love lost and now, impossibly, rediscovered. "You said your name was Julian," Eleanor challenged, her voice hoarse, still grappling with the impossible reality. He opened his eyes, the blue-gray depths still wet with tears, but now holding a renewed intensity. "Julian is my middle name," he explained, his voice softer, laced with a familiar melancholy. "I started using it after everything fell apart with my family. After I left home. David was the boy who loved you. Julian is the man who lost you. I carried his name, his memories, but not his hope, not for a long time." Eleanor felt an overwhelming tide of emotion wash over her. 45 years of lost time, of unanswered questions, of silent grief and quiet resignation, now suddenly revealed in the backseat of her Uber. The quiet rides, the shared melancholy, the lingering glances. It all clicked into place, imbued with a new, devastating significance. Then, decades of suppressed hurt erupted, a torrent of pent-up anger and sorrow. "Why didn't you come back, David?" she cried out, the words raw, tearing at her throat. You promised you'd come back." The questions, held captive in her heart for so long, finally broke free. His face crumpled, mirroring her anguish. "I tried, Eleanor. I swear I tried." His voice was choked with emotion. "My father, he found out about you. About us. He was furious. Said you weren't good enough. Not from the right background. Not worthy of the Morrison name." He shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping him. He threatened to cut off my college funding, to disown me entirely. Said he'd make sure I'd never get a dime, never inherit anything, never have a future if I didn't end it with you. Eleanor stared at him, accusation burning in her eyes. So you chose your family over me. You chose money and status over our love. The words tasted bitter on her tongue, the old hurt sharp and fresh. Julian fiercely denied it, his voice rising with a desperate intensity. No, that's not how it was, Eleanor. I chose to make something of myself so I could come back for you and prove him wrong. I didn't want to bring you into a life where I had nothing, where I was reliant on him. I wanted to be worthy of you, to build something entirely my own, so his opinion wouldn't matter. I swore I would return for you, stronger, independent. He continued, his words tumbling out, fueled by years of suppressed pain. I worked twice as hard, Eleanor. I built my own business from scratch, refused his help. I pushed myself relentlessly, day and night, until I was successful enough, powerful enough, that his threats and his opinions wouldn't matter anymore. I wanted to come back to you as a man who could stand on his own 2 feet, free of his influence. Eleanor listened, but his words, rather than soothing, felt like a slap. 3 years? She exclaimed, her voice incredulous, laced with a fresh wave of betrayal. 3 years, David? I waited for 3 years. I turned down dates. I avoided anyone who showed interest. I lived like a nun because I believed you were coming back. Every day, I watched the road, waiting for your car, waiting for you to walk through the diner door. 3 years of my life, gone, because I believed in your promise. I did come back, Eleanor. Julian's voice was a low rumble, breaking through the accusations that had hung heavy in the air. In the spring of 1981, I drove back to Richmond. I had a ring in my pocket, ready to beg your forgiveness, ready to ask you to marry me. Eleanor's heart, already a bruised and battered thing, clenched violently in her chest. Spring of 1981. The timing was a cruel twist of fate, a brutal mockery of their intertwined histories. That was the very season, the very year, she had married Arthur. A rebound marriage, she knew, deep down, born of loneliness and a desperate need for stability, after years of waiting for a ghost, a promise that had seemed to evaporate into thin air. I saw you through the diner window, Julian continued, his voice heavy with a pain that mirrored her own. You were laughing, showing off your engagement ring to your father, your eyes shining. In that moment, I realized I was too late. My dream, my purpose for all those years, had shattered before my eyes. Eleanor wanted to protest, to scream that he could have spoken to her, could have explained, but Julian anticipated her unspoken question. I couldn't, Eleanor. I loved you too much to ruin your happiness. You looked so genuinely happy. I couldn't be the one to cast a shadow on that. They sat in the quiet of the gas station parking lot, the rain still falling softly outside, a muffled rhythm against the car roof. Both of them were openly crying now, tears streaming down their faces, not just for the raw pain of the present, but for the profound grief of 45 years of missed chances, of lives lived in parallel, so close, yet tragically apart. The unspoken future they had once planned, the joy they had once shared, lay shattered between them. Julian took a deep, shuddering breath. I watched you get married, Eleanor. I stood in the back of the church, hidden from view, and watched you walk down that aisle, radiant and beautiful. Then I left town. I never came back. He revealed that he had never married. He had built his wealth, traveling the world, seeing incredible sights, but always carrying a hollow ache in his heart. I never found anyone, he confessed, his gaze meeting hers, full of a heartbreaking honesty, who made me feel the way you did that summer. No one who brought that kind of light into my life. Eleanor, despite her own swirling emotions, felt a fierce loyalty to Arthur. I had a good marriage, David, she insisted, her voice firm. Arthur was a good man. He loved me. We were happy. It was true. Arthur had been kind, steady, a loving father to Nathaniel. He had given her peace and companionship, A safe harbor after the storm of David's disappearance. Julian's face softened, a genuine, gentle smile touching his lips. "I'm glad, Eleanor," he said, his voice sincere. "Truly. That's all I ever wanted for you." A new question surfaced in Eleanor's mind, urgent and disorienting. How? How did you find me? After all this time, Julian reached for his phone, his silver-haired fingers surprisingly delicate as he navigated the screen. He showed her a series of old photographs, images of her throughout her life, pictures taken from a distance, subtly, carefully. "I never truly stopped looking, Eleanor. After a few years, when I had built my own business and was truly independent, I started keeping tabs on you. I hired a private investigator to make sure you were happy, safe. He updated me every few years." His eyes met hers, a profound sadness clouding them. "Then, when I got sick, I knew I had to see you one last time," he continued, his voice growing softer. "My investigator told me you were driving for Uber. It took some doing, but I figured out how to specifically request you. At first I just wanted to see you once, just to know you were well. But once wasn't enough, Eleanor. Every Wednesday, sitting behind you, hearing your voice." "You got sick?" Eleanor asked, the words a terrified whisper. The fragile hope of a rediscovered love, already so tenuous, seemed to shimmer and crack. Julian nodded, his expression grave, the deep melancholy that always shadowed him now fully taking hold. "Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctors give me a few weeks, perhaps a month at best." Eleanor was devastated. The news hit her with the force of a physical blow, stealing her breath. She reached across the console, her hand instinctively going to his, a desperate need for connection. He gently squeezed her fingers, his touch familiar, comforting. "It's all right, Eleanor," he said, his voice surprisingly calm, almost peaceful. "I've made my peace with it. But I couldn't leave this world without seeing you one more time, without telling you." He wanted to tell her loving you was the best thing I ever did. His eyes, though brimming with tears, held a depth of affection that made her own tears flow freely. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he reached into the inner pocket of his impeccably tailored jacket and handed her a thick, heavy envelope, sealed with a wax stamp. "This is for you, Eleanor," he said, his gaze unwavering. "My final gift." He looked at her, a profound love shining in his blue-gray eyes. "You reminded me what it felt like to be alive again, Eleanor. These last few weeks, they've been a glimpse of what could have been. You were loved completely and forever." Eleanor rose. With a final, lingering look, he opened the car door. He stood for a moment, the cold rain beating on his silver hair. And then, despite his tears, he smiled. It was a radiant, pure smile, the smile of the young David she remembered, full of love and hope, untainted by decades of regret. "You won't," he whispered, a gentle correction to an unvoiced thought of another goodbye. "This is goodbye, my love, but it's not an ending." Then, with a final wave, he turned and disappeared into the relentless rain, a solitary figure walking towards an unknown, inevitable horizon. He was gone. Eleanor sat in her idling car, the thick, heavy envelope clutched in her trembling hands, watching Julian Hawthorne's retreating figure disappear into the chaotic maw of the airport. The rain still fell, mirroring the tears that streamed down her face, blurring her vision. He was gone. Again. But this time, it was a finality. A farewell steeped in the bittersweet tragedy of what might have been. The silence in the car was deafening, filled only with the echoes of lost promises and rediscovered love. That night, back in her cramped studio apartment, the weight of the envelope pressed against her. With a mixture of dread and a fragile hope, she finally opened it. Inside, nestled beneath a simple folded note, was a check for $10,000. Her breath caught in her throat. Below the check, the note was simple, in his familiar, elegant handwriting. As her fingers probed further, her hand brushed against something small and solid at the bottom of the envelope. She pulled out a small velvet box, aged and worn. Her heart pounded as she opened it. Inside, resting on a bed of faded white satin, was a vintage solitaire engagement ring. A single, brilliant diamond, surrounded by intricate filigree, sparkled in the dim light of her apartment. Below it, another note, scrawled on a tiny piece of paper. "I bought this in 1981. I've carried it ever since." Eleanor collapsed onto her couch, the ring box clutched to her chest, the notes scattered around her. She cried then, not just for David, but for the lost years, for the two young lovers whose paths had diverged so tragically, for the lives they had each lived in the shadow of that summer. Her tears were a torrent of grief and a profound, aching sorrow for what could have been. She wept until she was utterly drained, feeling that the story had truly reached its heart-wrenching conclusion. Little did she know, this was just the beginning. 1 week later, a call came that shattered the fragile peace she had found in her grief. "Mrs. Henderson?" A polite, professional voice inquired. "My name is Spencer Thorne, from Blackwell Stone and Associates. I'm calling you regarding the estate of Julian Hawthorne." Eleanor's heart stopped. Julian Hawthorne. David. The sudden mention of his name, in such a formal context, sent a jolt of ice through her veins. "Yes?" she managed, her voice barely a whisper. Mr. Thorne continued, his tone sympathetic. "I regret to inform you that Mr. Hawthorne passed away peacefully 3 days ago. He left very specific instructions regarding you in his will, and I need to arrange a meeting." The phone clattered from Eleanor's numb fingers, hitting the threadbare carpet with a dull thud. David was truly, irrevocably gone. The goodbye at the airport, the last radiant smile, the words, "It's not an ending." They now held a heartbreaking finality. The world around her seemed to tilt on its axis. Trembling, Eleanor picked up the phone, her mind a whirlwind of confusion. Why her? Why would Julian, a man she had known for only a few short weeks, leave her anything in his will? She managed to schedule a meeting for the next morning, her voice shaking with a mixture of grief and utter bewilderment. She spent a sleepless night, her thoughts racing. Had Julian planned this? Had he known from the very first Wednesday ride that he would do this for her? Was their rediscovered connection merely a poignant farewell? Or something more profound? Something that would resonate beyond his passing? The unanswered questions gnawed at her, compounding her sorrow. The next morning, Eleanor found herself in the gleaming, imposing lobby of Blackwell Stone and Associates. The office exuded an air of quiet power and immense wealth, a world far removed from her tiny studio apartment and her Uber-X life. Spencer Thorne, a silver-haired man with kind, intelligent eyes and the crisp suit of a high-powered attorney, greeted her warmly. He led her into a plush office, filled with dark wood and leather, and offered her a seat. "Mrs. Henderson," he began, his voice gentle but firm. Mr. Hawthorne was a remarkable man, and a very private one. His affairs were meticulously managed. He paused, a thoughtful expression on his face. "I've been his attorney for decades, and I've never seen him as emotional about anything as he was when he changed his will 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks ago. That was precisely when their weekly rides had begun. The coincidence was too stark to ignore, further confirming her darkest suspicions about his intentions. Mr. Hawthorne came in specifically to add you as his primary beneficiary. Mrs. Henderson." Mr. Thorne continued, his gaze direct. "He was very clear about his wishes, exceptionally so. He wanted to ensure that you were taken care of." Eleanor's mind struggled to comprehend. Primary beneficiary? For what? His house? Some small legacy? I don't understand." She stammered, her voice barely audible. Mr. Thorne leaned forward slightly, his expression one of calm certainty. "The total value is approximately $260 million. The words hung in the air, impossibly vast, utterly incomprehensible. $260 million. Eleanor felt a dizzying sensation, as if the floor had dropped out from under her. The room began to spin. "That's impossible," she whispered, utterly incredulous, her mind refusing to grasp the enormity of it. There must be some mistake. Mr. Thorne merely offered a small, knowing smile. He reached across the polished desk and slid a thick, handwritten letter from Julian towards her. There's no mistake, Mrs. Henderson. This letter, personally penned by Mr. Hawthorne, explains everything. It's a profound declaration of his lifelong love for you, a testament to his wishes to ensure you were taken care of the way she should have been all along. Tears blurred Eleanor's vision as she read Julian's letter, his elegant script, a bittersweet echo of his voice. He wrote not of charity, but of a sacred obligation. This is not a handout, my dearest Eleanor Rose. The letter read, but a debt repaid, a future secured. My only regret is that it took me so long to ensure the woman I loved for 45 years had the security and freedom she deserved, the kind of life I always dreamed of giving her. Each word was a caress, a testament to a love that had defied time and separation. It spoke of a devotion that had never wavered, a silent promise kept even in death. Spencer Thorne, ever the professional, allowed her a moment to compose herself before presenting a stack of legal documents. He explained that Julian, with meticulous foresight, had explicitly drafted his will to declare Eleanor the sole deserving beneficiary. There were no other close family members to contest it, no ambiguities. Julian, an only child, a man who had become a hermit in his grief and ambition, had no close friends or other relatives who could lay claim to his vast fortune. Mr. Thorne emphasized that any attempts by distant relatives or opportunistic parties to challenge the will would be met with the full force of Julian's carefully constructed legal protections. He truly wanted you to be taken care of, Mrs. Henderson, Mr. Thorne reiterated, his voice gentle. He built his empire for this very purpose, though he never articulated it quite so directly until his final weeks. He went on to explain the source of Julian's immense wealth. A lifetime of brilliant real estate investment and development, a vast, diversified portfolio spanning across 12 major cities, a testament to his drive and his solitary genius. Eleanor listened, numb, as Mr. Thorne detailed the specifics. After all taxes, legal fees, and administrative costs, she would receive approximately $180 million. The sheer scale of it was almost too much to process, a dizzying sum that redefined not just her future, but her past. Then, Mr. Thorne leaned forward, his expression softening with a hint of compassion. Mrs. Henderson, there's something else you should know. Mr. Hawthorne's private investigator. He wasn't just tracking your general well-being. He was aware of what happened with your house, with your family. A fresh wave of shock washed over Eleanor. Julian knew. He knew about Nathaniel and Serafina, about the betrayal, about her eviction. His final letter, which she still clutched, now made even more heartbreaking sense. I learned that Nathaniel and Serafina left you with nothing, it continued, his words tinged with an indignant fury that brought tears to her eyes. My heart broke anew to think of you, my Eleanor Rose, forced to drive for strangers, stripped of your home, your dignity. They took everything. But I intend to give it all back. And then some. He concluded his letter with a powerful directive, a profound gift that went beyond mere financial provision. He had given Eleanor the power to decide what happens next, the power to choose whether to help Nathaniel and Serafina, or to ensure they never have the power to hurt you again. In that moment, Eleanor realized Julian had given her something even more valuable than money: control over her own narrative, the ability to reclaim her future, and perhaps, to finally heal the wounds of her past. For 3 days, Eleanor existed in a fog of disbelief, processing the impossible truth, the magnitude of the inheritance, the depth of Julian's lifelong love, and the devastating revelation of his knowledge about her children's betrayal. When the shock finally began to subside, a cold, clear resolve settled within her. She picked up her phone and dialed Nathaniel's number. It rang several times before he answered, his voice laced with surprise, and perhaps a hint of defensiveness. Mom? Wow. We hadn't heard from you in months. Is everything all right? Eleanor's voice, when she spoke, was calm, firm, and devoid of the wavering uncertainty that had characterized it for so long. I need to see you. Both of you. Tomorrow at 2 o'clock. At the house. She didn't wait for a response, simply hung up. The click of the phone, a punctuation mark on her newfound resolve. The next afternoon, precisely at 2 o'clock, Eleanor pulled her modest Uber X into the driveway of her former home. It looked different now, alien. The vibrant flower beds she had lovingly tended were gone, replaced by soulless, geometric landscaping. The warm, inviting red of the front door had been painted a stark, unforgiving black. It was no longer her home. It was a monument to her betrayal. Nathaniel answered the door, looking older, his face etched with a defensive wariness. Before he could speak, Serafina appeared. A forced, artificial smile plastered on her face, her eyes assessing, calculating. "Eleanor, what a surprise. How wonderful to see you. How's the new apartment working out for you?" Her voice dripped with feigned enthusiasm, a thinly veiled condescension that grated on Eleanor's nerves. Eleanor stepped inside, surveying the space that had once been filled with Arthur's laughter and her own cherished memories. The familiar, comforting furniture was gone, replaced by sleek, modern pieces that felt cold and unwelcoming. The walls, once adorned with family photos, were starkly bare. "We decided to go for something more contemporary." "Eleanor," Serafina chirped, oblivious to the deeper significance of the changes. It just felt right for the space. Eleanor turned to face them. Her eyes, usually so soft, now held a steely glint they had never seen before. She took a deep breath, the words measured, deliberate, designed to land with maximum impact. "On Monday," she began, her voice clear and strong, "I inherited $260 million. The room went silent. The air crackled with a sudden, stunned disbelief. Nathaniel's jaw dropped. Serafina's forced smile vanished, replaced by a look of utter, profound shock. The silence in the room stretched, thick and suffocating, punctuated only by the soft hum of the expensive, new refrigerator. Serafina, ever the opportunist, was the first to recover. Her eyes, which moments before had been wide with shock, narrowed, glinting with a familiar, calculating shrewdness. She smoothed her dress, a practiced gesture of composure. "Eleanor, that's truly astounding news. A real windfall. You must be overwhelmed. Nathaniel and I would be absolutely thrilled to help you manage it. You know, with our business acumen, we could really make that money work for you." A saccharine smile stretched across her face, a clear invitation for Eleanor to hand over her newfound fortune. Eleanor held up a hand, stopping Serafina cold. Her voice, though low, carried an undeniable authority that she hadn't known she possessed. "Just stop. Do you honestly think I'm stupid, Serafina?" Her gaze then shifted to Nathaniel, who was still speechless, his face pale. "And you, Nathaniel, how could you stand by and let her steal my home? How could you abandon your own mother to poverty?" Nathaniel stammered, scrambling for words. "Mom, it wasn't like that. The business. We were desperate. We were facing ruin. We thought it was the only way to save everything." He wrung his hands, avoiding her direct gaze. Eleanor's eyes swept around the newly renovated living room, taking in the gleaming surfaces, the expensive artwork. "The business that's apparently doing well enough to afford all this, then?" she asked, her tone laced with a biting sarcasm. Serafina, her mask of sweet concern finally slipping, stood up, her hands on her hips. "Now wait just a minute, Eleanor. You act like we committed some terrible crime. You signed those papers willingly. It was a fair exchange. You got a nice sum, more than your old house was worth," Eleanor snapped. A lifetime of suppressed anger, of hurt, of betrayal, finally erupted. "I signed those papers because I trusted you," she roared, her voice shaking with raw emotion. "You promised it was temporary. You sat in my kitchen, right there, crying fake tears about Olivia and Leo, begging me to save their home. And then you threw me out on the street." Serafina shrugged, a dismissive gesture that ignited a fresh wave of fury in Eleanor. "Things change, Eleanor. We found better opportunities. That's just how the world works." "You're right," Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a quiet, dangerous calm. Things do change. She looked around the house, a place that now felt utterly alien, stripped of all warmth and memory. I won't be buying back this house, if that's what you're thinking. It's cold and empty now. Just like yourselves. She watched their faces, seeing a dawning horror begin to replace their shock. I have, however, made arrangements for Olivia and Leo, she continued, her voice clear and decisive. I've set up education trusts for them, full college funding, managed by independent trustees. The funds will be inaccessible until they turn 18, ensuring their future is secure, regardless of your decisions. Serafina's jaw dropped, then she let out a furious gasp, her face contorting in rage. You can't do that. That's our money. We're their parents. Eleanor met her fury with unyielding resolve. I can, and I have. Those children are innocent in all this. They deserve opportunities, a future unburdened by your choices, even if their parents clearly don't. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. And let me be clear, I've also hired a private investigator, a very good one. He's already looking into the fraud surrounding the papers I signed. Nathaniel, finally breaking from his stupor, rushed forward, his face desperate. Mom, please, don't do this. We're family. We can fix this. Let's be a family again. Eleanor looked at him, truly looked at him, and for a fleeting moment, saw the kind, earnest boy he once was. But the image quickly faded, replaced by the man who had chosen greed, who had stood by while his mother was stripped of everything. Are you sorry you hurt me, Nathaniel? She asked, her voice quiet, almost mournful. Or are you just sorry you missed out on $260 million? His silence, filled with the calculating flicker in his eyes, was all the answer she needed. She turned and walked out, leaving them stunned in the hollow silence of her former home. As she pulled out of the driveway, she glanced in the rearview mirror. Serafina was already talking animatedly, likely planning her next manipulation, her next move. But Eleanor knew, with a deep and liberating certainty, that it was too late. She wasn't broken anymore. She was free. 6 months later, Eleanor stood on the wide, welcoming porch of her new home, a charming 1,920 farmhouse nestled deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains. It was a simple, perfect home, surrounded by 20 acres of rolling hills and whispering trees. Life had begun anew. By the pond, she had a stone bench installed, overlooking the tranquil water. On it, a simple inscription read, "For David, who taught me that love never really ends." Spencer Thorne had guided her patiently through the complexities of her inheritance, managing the vast sums with calm expertise. She had slowly, thoughtfully, furnished her home, each piece chosen not for its price tag, but for the comfort and peace it brought. She rediscovered simple pleasures: gardening, reading by the fire, watching the sunset paint the mountains in hues of gold and purple. Nathaniel and Serafina's persistent, increasingly desperate attempts to contact her were met with unwavering silence and stern legal warnings from Spencer, eventually leading to their complete cessation. The private investigator had confirmed Serafina's deliberate fraud, an airtight case. But Eleanor, choosing freedom over revenge, decided not to press charges. Instead, Serafina's reputation, once carefully constructed, suffered a quiet, social death within their affluent circles. The education trusts for Olivia and Leo were firmly established. Eleanor sent them cards on their birthdays and holidays, simple notes expressing her love, looking forward to the day when they were older, when they could perhaps understand. She also quietly funded a scholarship program for students who had faced similar betrayals, a subtle act of defiance and hope. She reconnected with old friends, Beverly and Patricia, who embraced her with warmth and genuine affection, asking no questions, offering no judgment, only camaraderie. Her social life, once shriveled, slowly began to bloom again. In the quiet evenings, Eleanor began to go through Julian's personal papers, a trove of his life. She discovered the full extent of his profound love, an ethical business empire built on integrity, his anonymous philanthropic donations, his remarkably simple, almost ascetic personal life. And there, tucked into his oldest journal, was the faded picture of her at 17, the one he had kept all those years. His early journals, filled with his youthful ambition, often ended with a poignant, recurring phrase, "But she wasn't Eleanor." His final journal entry, written 2 weeks before their first Uber ride, detailed his pancreatic cancer diagnosis, his profound regret at their lost years, and his final, desperate decision to find her. He wrote of finally mustering the courage to reveal himself, knowing it would be a brief, bittersweet reunion. Eleanor, holding Julian's engagement ring, its diamond sparkling with the light of a love that had waited 45 years, finally understood. It was never too late to start over. She was choosing her own ending, a new beginning, funded by a love that had set her free.